Hi, my name's Kevin Hicks. Welcome to the History Squad. Now today we're on location at the museum where I volunteer at, the Saskatoon Museum of Military Artifacts. Hey, and we're looking at our little section here all about the stretcher bearers from World War I. Now, they're often regarded as the unsung heroes of the First World War. Well, an ex-soldier, I've been picked up by many a medic and repaired. They've never been forgotten by me. But we're going to do a little look into see what we've got and give you a couple of stories about World War I stretcher bearers. Now, if you go back in the history of both the British and the Canadian Army, you look at a stretcher bearer. They were the bandsmen, the guys who played the drums, blew the bugles. Their job after a battle, or during a battle in fact, was to run with a stretcher and pick up the wounded. Victorian times, it was very rudimentary, but come the First World War, things had changed. Your stretcher bearer, he had training. He learned how to put on a tourniquet to stop the bleeding, how to patch you up before he loaded you onto the stretcher and dragged you back. So there is a very big change in the role of the stretcher bearer, but also First World War, they're not just a bandsman, or they're not just the Royal Army Medical Corps. Now you have a couple of stretcher bearers in your battalion. And that's really good, because if you're wounded and you're picked up by somebody you know, even if you just, you know his face, then it's going to calm you. You're right, Bill, I know your name. Now, I know how important it is to have an army medic or somebody who knows at least a little dealing with you. I almost lost an eye, and it was saved for me by an army medic. He knew what he was doing. He got in there. I've actually been on a stretcher. It's very uncomfortable. But you imagine First World War. You're hit, you're in no man's land, you're sinking in the mud. You don't shout medic, medic, you call stretcher bearer. And it was down to these stretcher bearers without a rifle, without a pistol, who will go into no man's land under fire to come and dig you out. Just interesting. It can take anything up to 10 men to get one casualty through and out of the trenches. What we have here is a First World War uniform, Canadian Army, of Lord Strathcona's horse. And he is a stretcher bearer, and he has no ammunition, no rifle. In fact, he carries a water flask, a canteen. He will carry an extra one, maybe an extra two, because I know from bitter experience, when you're hurt, you get thirsty very quickly, especially if you're leaking that blood. But he would have carried one of these. This is, I think, quite rare. I've never seen one before in a museum anywhere. This is a bandage bag, and it's blood-stained. First World War. So in here, he'll have extra field dressings, extra bandages. And the bandages are quite something, because each soldier carried one just tucked inside his tunic. And when you open them, there are two bandages. Well, if a bullet goes through you, you need one front and back. But it's what is contained within this which is important. There's a little tube, and it's a cardboard vial. You have to tease that out, then you knock out the little glass bottle that's inside, snap it, and pour the iodine into your wound. Well, if you've been shot, blown up, or simply knocked to pieces, you're shaking. You're not going to be able to do it. These guys, they literally risk their lives every day to get out into the battlefield, into no man's land, under fire. And they will make sure you have some of this. Now, I've been doing some reading, and one Canadian stretcher bearer says he was just inundated. Stretcher bearer. And he was going from man to man. And he mentioned how he gave one of them an injection. Then he moved on to the next guy to plug the wound. So these weren't just men who carried the stretcher. They had training, tourniquets, stopping that bleeding, all of this. These guys could do it. But it's that stretcher. You look at our stretcher we have here. This is World War I stretcher. It was actually used by the Canadian Army. The thing that gets me is some medic has cut a hole in it here. That's got to be for draining. And it is stained. The whole thing is stained awfully. And I hate to think of the men, the young men carried on that, who would have suffered. And of course, those who didn't make it to the first field station, to the dressing station, because that's what the medic's got to do. He's got to pick up the wounded guy, They've then got to manhandle him through the mud of Passchendaele or later on the Somme, get him back into the trenches, along the trench. And don't forget, these stretchers don't fit round trenches. Trenches are for fighting in. So sometimes you might have to even lift the casualty just a little bit high onto your shoulder. You eventually get him out. There'll be a relay of guys. You're exhausted, getting through that mud, getting the guy out. When you're eventually out of the trenches, there will be your first aid station. There they can then deal with him. They can move him on down the line. We have an artifact here in the museum. It's just a letter from a father to the commanding officer of his son who was killed in the latter part of 1916. With this letter, you can almost touch the grief. So I mounted it, and so you can see both sides. And what the letter basically says, it's a reply to the officer commanding's letter saying, look, your son was killed, and here's £2 that was in his pocket, kind of thing. And the father writes back and he says, when we received your letter, it was the first we knew about our son. And this guy's been so polite, a Scotsman, and he says, we were really upset because our other son had been killed in 1915. Oh my goodness me. You read it, it literally does pull on your heartstrings. But then he asked the officer commanding, is there any chance you could track down the stretcher bearer for us who bore our son from the battlefield? We'd like to write to them and ask, did our son say anything before he died? You are almost touching the grief. You can really see how brave the stretcher bearers were in World War I. Well, of course, they're brave in all of the wars, aren't they? But particularly World War I, the amount of stretcher bearers that were awarded the Victoria Cross. We got one here, a Canadian soldier, is actually born in Britain. Private John Francis Young. He was the 87th Battalion, the Canadian Expeditionary Force. He signed up in 1915, so he'd been in the front line for quite some time. But he was on the 100-day offensive, the final Hague offensive as they call it, going up the Arras-Cambrai Road, that area. On the 2nd of September 1918, he saw some incredible action. Now, I know all about this battle. My great-grandfather was killed just a couple of weeks before this action took place. Now, before I go any further, I'm going to read from the citation to give you an idea about what this young Canadian soldier did. Now, the Canadians had pushed forward. They were attacking between two towns, Drocourt and Cuon in northern France. The attack was going in, but the Canadians found themselves outflanked. They were being mown down by machine gun fire from left and right, as well as heavy artillery fire. And during the attack, John Francis Young tended to the wounded of his company, which had suffered heavy casualties. Working on open ground swept by machine gun fire and rifle fire, he tended to the injured for over an hour. So this isn't just a spontaneous, right, I'll go and get one. He's under all of that heavy fire for an hour. Several times he left the battlefield to resupply his medical kit, returning into harm's way for the sake of the wounded. He then organised his company's stretcher bearers and led them to where the men needed their help. He did this for at least an hour. He then directed the evacuation of over a dozen men. The Germans then laid down a heavy cloud of mustard gas. And this brave soldier, John, well, he was wounded. Well, he lived till 1929 when he died of tuberculosis, and it states, brought on by the effects of mustard gas. May you rest in peace. My last story about a stretcher bearer is about Bill Coltman, North Staffordshire Regiment. Should I say Bill Coltman, VC, said to be the highest decorated British soldier from World War I. Well, it's very special to me because I knew about Bill Coltman, VC, from a very young age. My family are from his villages. These small villages all up in Staffordshire in the centre of England. In fact, the first cap badge I ever wore was the North Staffordshire Regiment cap badge when I was a young army cadet in Lichfield in Staffordshire. So this is close to me. Not only that, I went to teach some kids all about the Roman army just outside of Burton-on-Trent in Staffordshire. When I look up in the hall there is the photograph of Bill Coltman, VC. And I says to the head teacher, "Wow, you've got Bill Coltman, VC." She went, "Who's that?" I said, "The soldier." And she says, "Oh, yeah, he went to this school." And I says, "You know who he is?" "Well, he was a soldier, wasn't he, in the First War?" I says, "Hey." When I'd finished, she was going, "Wow, really?" So let's tell you about Bill Coltman, VC. You see, he was Plymouth Brethren, so he was an absolute pacifist. But he served. He was not a conscientious objector, but he refused to kill. So he became a stretcher bearer, the North Staffordshire Regiment. So when I was reading about Bill Coltman, this personal hero, I suppose you'd call him, of mine, I find out that he wasn't the highest decorated British soldier of the First World War. He was the most highly decorated British soldier of other ranks. In other words, he was like me. He wasn't an officer. In fact, he ended up with one stripe, if I remember correctly. He was a lance corporal. And he didn't join the army as a stretcher bearer. In fact, although he was Plymouth Brethren, he did go into action with a rifle in hand. And he was trapped overnight in a shell hole under heavy shelling. And he was devastated by the sound of the wounded who were lying out in no man's land. So he immediately volunteered to be a stretcher bearer, put the rifle down, pick up the stretcher. There were 16 stretcher bearers in a battalion of, say, 1,000 men. 6 weeks training, so he would have learned how to, immobilize a fracture, deal with hemorrhaging and guys who are in shock. So it wasn't a case of I want to be a stretcher bearer. He put on the stretcher bearer armband and went off. No, 6 weeks training. So these guys were the forerunners of the paramedics, I suppose. So when we talk about Bill Coltman, this not very tall guy, Lance Corporal, Victoria Cross, wow. But actually you've got to go back to the Somme, 1916, when he was mentioned in dispatches for his brave work that he was doing. And then February 1917, when he was awarded the military medal. There'd been a wiring party or something going out into no man's land in the middle of the night. They were working in the mist, and the mist lifted. The Germans saw them mowing them down. Bill Coltman runs out, finds the officer, dresses his wound, brings him back in. And then you have another military medal, a bar to his military medal, so he's got it twice. August 1917. Mortar bombs had landed into an ammunition dump. Guys had been wounded. But there was a fire, and there were varied pistols. There were the flares, the magnesium flares were there. So Bill actually removes the flares from the fire, which is extremely dangerous, then helps to tend to the injured. And then that night, there were guys who were trapped in the headquarters that had been mortared. So he tends to those. And then a tunnel collapses the following week, and men are trapped. And Bill organises the rescue party and helps dig and evacuate for the wounded for that. So that's his second military medal, or a bar to his MM. Wow, what a guy. Now in July 1917, Bill Coltman is awarded the Distinguished Conduct Medal. That is only awarded for conspicuous gallantry. What he did was he stayed out all night recovering wounded from the battlefield, under fire, heavy artillery and machine gun fire. He then gets a bar, the second Distinguished Conduct Medal, in September 1918, right up towards the end of the war on the St. Quentin Canal. The Staffords had advanced, a good fight. Behind them they'd left their wounded. And Bill would not leave the battlefield. He was still under fire until every single wounded Stafford man was cleared off the battlefield. So after their amazing victory, their gallant victory for the St. Quentin Canal, the Staffordshire Regiment advanced with their Midland Division, and it's known as the Battle of Ramicourt. And as the Staffords are moving forward, they're expecting little resistance, but they were in for a shock. The Germans reinforced themselves, laid down heavy machine gun fire. So the Staffords fixed bayonets and charged. And what I read, it says their bayonets were blooded. But the Staffords were then forced back by crossfire, heavy artillery. As they're streaming back, they've had to leave behind the more serious wounded. Bill Coltman, he's listening to the guys who are coming back and he's saying, what's the score? And he told them that there are men out there. So what does Bill do? He goes towards the sound of the gunfire. Can you imagine being one of those guys that's been left behind? You've been hit, wounded, blown up, whatever. You're lying there just on a little bit of cover. You're trying to plug the hole. You're in shock. And you know you're alone. Nobody's coming to get you. You're going to die. Then all of a sudden, Bill Coltman is next to you. You know his face. You might even know him personally from the same battalion. Gives you a quick drink from his flask. He plugs the holes in your wound, braces your leg, whatever it is. He then drags you up over his shoulders, over his back, and takes you back to our lines. Plonks that guy down with the other stretcher bearers, regimental aid post further down, and then Bill goes back out into the gunfire. Again and again and again. In fact, he kept it up for 48 hours before he would take a break. For this, he was awarded the Victoria Cross, and I'm going to read the citation to you. For most conspicuous bravery, initiative and devotion to duty during the operations at Mannequin Hill, northeast of Sequihart on the 3rd and 4th of October 1918, Lance Corporal Coltman, a stretcher bearer, hearing that wounded had been left behind during a retirement, he went forward alone in the face of fierce enfilade fire, found the casualties, dressed them, and on 3 successive occasions carried comrades on his back to safety, thus saving their lives. This very gallant NCO tended the wounded unceasingly for 48 hours. Coltman was invested with his Victoria Cross by King George V at Buckingham Palace, 22nd of May 1919. After that, he's on the train home to Burton-upon-Trent, but he heard that there was a big celebration waiting for him at Burton-on-Trent. So Bill simply got off the train the station before to avoid all the fuss. So Lance Corporal Bill Coltman VC survives the war. After the war, he retires from the army, becomes a gardener for the Town Parks Department, Burton-upon-Trent. In the Second World War, he's commissioned as an officer into the Army Cadet Force. He lived to the age of 82, died in 1974. He's buried in St Mark's Parish Church in Winshill in Staffordshire, and he's buried with his wife Eleanor May. I know exactly where he's buried because I took the time out from visiting his school and I visited his grave. May he rest in peace. So just to finish our little video here, we've got a poem, The Stretcher Bearer, written by Robert W. Service, who was known as the Canadian Kipling. He was a British-born Canadian poet, but he served as a stretcher bearer during the First World War for the American Red Cross, so he really knew what he was talking about. So let's have a read of this quite sad poem, really. The Stretcher Bearer. My stretcher is one scarlet stain, and as I tries to scrape it clean, I tell you what, I'm sick with pain, for all I've heard, for all I've seen. Around me is the hellish night, and as the war's red rim I trace, I wonder if in heaven's height our God don't turn away his face. I don't care whose the crime may be, I holds no brief for kin or clan. I hims no hate, I only see, as man destroys his brother man. I waves no flag, I only know, as here besides the dead I wait, a million hearts is weighed with woe, a million homes is desolate. In dripping darkness far and near, all night I've sought them woeful ones. Dawn shudders up and still I hear the crimson chorus of the guns. Look! Like a ball of blood the sun hangs o'er the scene of wrath and wrong. Quick, stretcher bearers on the run. O Prince of Peace, how long, how long? Well, I hope you enjoyed that video of ours, having a little look into the stretcher bearers of World War I. Brave people for sure. Now, if you enjoyed the video, like, share and subscribe. And if you'd like to support the channel further, why not have a look at joining our Patreon community? The link is in the description. Now, before I go, I've got some names written down here of some of our Patreon members. So this is a big thanks to these people. Alex Wilson, Christopher Harrison, CJ Saley. Hey guys, thanks a million. Without your support, I couldn't do half of this. So bye for now.